So we're going to jump right in. I'm going to set the tone for why this conversation is important and why we're having this. And then we'll bring up, I'll introduce Amy. So in 2019, I ended up getting my real estate license initially just to do my own investment deals. My wife had her license for a couple of years, and it was really, again, just to buy our own rental properties. In 2019, I decided in November to get my license. So got licensed. In 2020, I helped 14 families buy and sell homes. And then in 2021, I helped 36 families. And there was only one shift that happened in my personal business from 2020 to 2021, which was that I shifted my focus on working with investors. And so what I'll tell you is that this conversation may not be relevant to everybody in this room, but what I'll say is if you want to increase your business in 2025, this could be one of those avenues, is getting very skill set based around working with investors. And that's what today's conversation is going to be about, is how do you work and support investors at a high level? And what I'll tell you again is that this is a skill set. Okay. So you want to pick up the book. We have it at the front desk. It's The Millionaire Real Estate Investor. Many of you know the MREA. This is the MREI, okay, the Millionaire Real Estate Investor. Not only is it going to equip you with the knowledge to be able to educate clients through the investment process, but it's also going to help you with your own personal journey as being an agent investor. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Amy. So today we're going to have the Real Talk episode where we explore the journeys of top real estate professionals. And today we're joined by Amy Kendall, broker and partner at our KW Westfield Acadia and owner of Acadia Property Management. Amy has mastered both real estate sales and investing, consistently selling 25 to 40 units annually while managing over 300 rental properties. She is an expert at analyzing deals and working with seasoned investors. Amy has a unique story that started in the nursing field prior to becoming a real estate professional. Her experience at Capital Advisors as a residential investment expert, combined with her compassion and business aptitude, has earned her a spot as a UCAR Top 250 realtor. Today, we'll dive into Amy's perspective around working with real estate investors, ideas around portfolio design, and how to get in the game as an agent investor. So please welcome Amy Kendall. Yes. Welcome.
Thank you.
Amy.
Thank you.
I actually just want to, because we've talked about this, you joined KW a little over a year ago now, right? And so we went through this process together when you were exploring Keller Williams, and we talked about your backstory because you haven't been a real estate agent forever. So just kind of start with that. What were you doing before you got into real estate?
Sure. So I started in healthcare. I was in healthcare for like 10 years. So I started as actually a respiratory therapist. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar. So I was a respiratory therapist for about 5 years and then went on to get my bachelor's in nursing and wanted to eventually go on and do my anesthesiologist license or a CRNA license, and ended up having my first kid who was in the NICU. And so did not end up applying for that CRNA license, and then just falling in love with my own kid, actually. My original plan was to go back to work and school, and my husband was going to stay home with the babies. And I just really loved that little guy and decided to stay home. And so that kind of led me into the real estate journey that I took. So we moved back to Utah. We were living in Maine at that time. We moved back to Utah to be closer to family, and we owned a couple of rental properties at that point. So our original plan was to have 5 or 6 rental properties just totally paid off by the time we retired. And we had a couple at that point, and when I had my second kid, I decided to get my real estate license for the same reasons that you did. So we were like, hey, if we're going to keep buying these, it's really good for us to just be able to get that commission back on our own, deals, because we're both working, we're both professionals. We're working nights and weekends and holidays, and we're trying to work opposite shifts of each other so that someone's always home with the kids, and you don't have to have too many babysitters, and it just gets real hard. And so once we knew We wanted to continue to buy the investments. I just thought, man, I'll just get my license, and just started working away at it and finished, and then on we go.
Okay. Well, where did it spark from not only I want to have my license to do my own deals to like, I'm actually going to be an entrepreneur, start my own real estate business and actually get into the sales side? Because I know obviously you worked with capital advisors. So how did that whole transition take place?
So the entrepreneur part, I think I always struggled a little bit with, my husband would probably confirm this, but I always struggle a little bit with authority pretty consistently. He thought I was going to lose my job at the hospital because I just like had some very strong opinions about the way things were supposed to be done. So I think it started prior to me actually having any realization that I, wanted to do my own thing. But it happened when I was doing the finances. I was like, paying the bills and kind of doing the accounting stuff, and just started reading a lot. This was before Bigger Pockets was around. Bigger Pockets does come into play a little bit later. But before Bigger Pockets was around, I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It was just after we'd bought, so we had 2 rental properties. And we had bought the house that we're still in, actually, but we'd bought this house, and I felt like at the time it was a really nice house. And I was like, oh my gosh, we made the biggest mistake ever. We have got to sell this place. Like, we need to buy some more duplexes. Like, we need to sell this house. Like, we need to just buy and move and buy and move and buy and move. This is like a really good idea. Great plan. And my husband was like, good luck. Like, I'm not moving. This is a great house for us. Like, closer. So he said, yeah, no, we're not moving. We're going to have to figure out a different way. So that we sat down and did a 5-year plan for ourselves. And at that point was when I kind of launched into that. Like, I kind of had to figure out like how it was going to work. You know what I mean? Like, I kind of had to figure out, okay, we got to do more than just what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. So what happened? Where was that transition? Was it Bigger Pockets that really sparked the initial side of your business, or were there other strategies that you leaned into starting out?
No, on the real estate side, I used Bigger Pockets quite a bit when it first came out for a learning platform. And so I was on Bigger Pockets a lot. I probably still, I mean, there's lots of posts on there, just engaging with other people and trying to figure it out and understand things, and just even for my own portfolio. And so at that point, it was just the Bigger Pockets came into play because it was just a lot of learning for me. Where it really shifted into, okay, I can make this work, was probably just a few years in, actually, when you actually start to close like more transactions, and you're like, so this is a pretty viable way to make money. Not like, I don't maybe have to go work nights, weekends, holidays. I could spend, a little more time with my family and like be motivated. So it was really, really motivating once I started closing deals that were not my own. And that's what sparked it. So when I started closing deals, I was like, this is going to work out okay.
Awesome. So you started to catch the vision of what it
Yeah.
could evolve into over time.
Yeah.
So if you go back to that beginning, and those who are not familiar with Bigger Pockets, not only do they have a great podcast that you should go listen to, YouTube channel, they also have an online platform, kind of like Facebook, but for real estate investors. So there's bulletin boards and things that you can go read through specific topics, ask questions, and it's a great place to learn, is on that community. So and little side note for those who don't know, David Green is actually a Keller Williams agent, which is awesome in Vegas. And so he's great and runs most of the podcasts.
I met him at my last property management.
Oh, sweet.
He's a great guy.
Awesome. Well, kind of share with me. So let's actually jump to the part where we just talk about when you started to get purposeful around attracting investor clients, like how do you find investor clients in your sphere of influence, or how do you get investors to find you?
So Bigger Pockets is still a pretty big platform for me because there's just a lot of like interaction on there. So you can get on there. There's a lot of interacting. So people reach out to me, either organically or paid, like through Bigger Pockets. So Bigger Pockets has a platform that you can pay for leads. But I get quite a few organic leads from there, just because of the interacting that I do on the platform. So that's one way. But when I really started to dig in, it's just who you are talking to. So a lot of times when you're talking really even about regular real estate, you get really excited about it. Like the people that you're talking to, it's really exciting. Like if you're into luxury or if you're, like into even just regular residential real estate, I think people just get really excited about that. And so I was still working at the hospital. I worked at the hospital until January of 2020. I didn't need to. I really enjoyed working at the hospital. And so I'd work one Sunday a month. And so a lot of times I would just talk to people, and people are just always interested in what you're doing. And I would just talk to them about investing. And so then a lot of times it would just come from just people that you're regularly talking to. And then either they know somebody or, they want to invest. So either through, bigger pockets or, at the beginning, it was just those bigger pockets. They didn't have a paid platform back then. So all of the stuff at the beginning was organic. And then just people that and for me, I feel like the thing that made the biggest difference was that we were not I was not just telling someone to buy real estate. You know what I mean? I wasn't like, oh, hey, this is great because whatever, IRR appreciation, all the things, right? Like it was like, oh yeah, I bought 2 of these and they're working out great. I bought 1 of these, I bought this one. So it was more about like I was really trying to build our portfolio at that point. And I feel like that's what made a difference for me to actually like really work with investors, was because at first I would, I felt like I didn't know all the answers, and people would call me and ask me, and I'm like, man, I don't know why they're asking me that, and it just kind of evolved to be like, oh, because I did it and I have, so many of these properties or whatever.
Yeah.
So I really feel like that was what made it much, much easier for me to convert those people, was because I was doing it myself and I was not just saying, hey, look at this spreadsheet, like these numbers are good.
Yeah. And I think to highlight something that you've said there that I think is important, and it was the same like aha or awareness that I had, is just like having conversations with people, and then being very proactive on how can we talk about helping them build wealth, right? Which is the idea for me. I realized, how many of you know the stat? How many people need to buy or sell a home in a given year? What percentage from an NAR perspective? Single digit percentage, roughly 6 to 8%, right? That need to buy, sell in a given year because of death, divorce, deployment, whatever the need cases are. And when I first started out, I said, well, that isn't like a statistic that I like. I don't like a 6% chance, right? If you're talking to 100 people in your database or your sphere, that means only 6 people potentially have the likelihood of buying. And you're not guaranteed to do business with all 6, because you have to find who are the 6, and then you have to really sell your value on providing service to them as an agent. And so I said, well, how do we change that percentage? How do we increase our chance or likelihood of doing business with somebody? And I started to change the question that I would ask people in my database during conversations, which is just like, have you ever thought about buying or owning real estate to create passive income? And if you asked 100 people that question, do you think it's more than 6% that would say, yes, I would like to have some passive income? Yeah, right. And so for me, I found it was like 80 to 90%. Far more people said, yes, I just don't know how.
Yep.
And that's where, now coming back to your point, is like being the source of solutions, having the answers, right, to the kind of common questions that they might ask. And that's where I think one of the things I would love to hear about is, I think the skill set, the secret skill set for agents who want to work with investors, is understanding how to analyze a property. That's like the biggest thing that they're looking for, is an agent who actually knows the numbers, because investors are looking at math. It's not the emotional decision like a first-time home buyer, right? And so if you can help walk them through the math on why a property makes sense, understand the location, those type of factors, that helps them to move forward. So what things do you analyze when doing property analysis for investors, and what are maybe the key metrics that you prioritize?
So it depends on the investor. That's a little bit of a loaded question. When you're working with a first time, Am I doing something
You're
wrong?
good.
So when you're working with somebody that's a new investor, the metrics are almost always cash flow, right? Like a brand new investor is like the only thing that they can wrap their brain around is cash flow. And it's a really long, drawn out conversation or multiple conversations, usually to get them to understand that there's many ways that real estate really can help build that wealth over, a long time. I always like to tell people that real estate is a marathon. It is not a sprint, especially now more than ever where interest rates are high and prices are high. You really have to look at the other metrics. So appreciation and then the tax benefits, the interest write-off and so you have appreciation, depreciation, your interest write-off, and then you have cash flow. So just all of those things coupled together, those are the main things that people are going to look at. When you get into a more advanced investor, they're going to look at IRR and cash on cash and things like that. But for the most part, an investor is going to pay attention to those four things. I think that when you're talking about an owner-occupied person, the best conversation to have with them at first is certainly our market is a tough market. Like Utah is a really tough market to begin with. And you have to understand that if you're going to have to live somewhere anyway, you may as well be getting, these other benefits, from the real estate. If you're going to be paying a mortgage anyway, it's lovely to have someone help you subsidize that mortgage and then also have the appreciation, the depreciation, and then the loan pay down that you get in between those things. So those are usually the things that most investors will focus on, to begin with.
Love it. So really the four wealth generators, right? So in some of this stuff, you might feel like, oh, this is a foreign language. Some of the stuff, IRR, right? Or depreciation, some of these things you may not be fully aware of. And that is a great thing to write them down and study them. But also, again, if you read the MREI, this book has a lot of these terminologies spelt out and in a very digestible way. So if we get into, Amy, working with investors, I feel like they have a different, there's a different need of expectations compared to a traditional buyer or seller. So what are the key ways you tailor your service for investors compared to a traditional buyer or seller?
Spreadsheets, probably. I would say the biggest difference that I am going to run. So I typically will get on market every day and pull multifamily, I do residential and then I'll do the commercial side.
Did you say every day or once a month?
Every day.
Okay.
Did I say once a month?
No, I'm just saying, just pay attention to that, right? Like this is a daily practice that she has.
Yeah. So I wake up, typically it's like one of the first things I do is just look through the market, see what's new. And then for me, I actually, I've been doing it for a really long time. So I will look fairly quickly at what the square footage of that property is versus like what the income on the gross rent is. Because then I can decide, is it reasonable for us to be able to have a strategy to change the gross income? So when an investor is looking for an investment, they are really looking at a gross income number because everybody has a gross and then they're going to have expenses and then they're going to have a net. And so I want to know that the square footage, if I have a big unit and my gross number is pretty low, I think reasonably there is some sort of strategy that you can come in and say, okay, we could reasonably raise rents from this to this, and then our gross would be this, and it makes sense to pay this, right? So I will go in and I will look at properties pretty quickly, and just decide whether or not it's really worth running them through a spreadsheet or not. That's really what I'm trying to do. So it's worth me spending the time to go through and pull, insurance, taxes, rents, snow removal, landscaping, just kind of run numbers on that property. Because if it doesn't make a lot of sense, then I can just move on. So that saves me a little bit of time. But I would say going through and running numbers on properties every day is the most it's what taught me the most, like to just go through and say, okay, and if you don't know rents, I would go through Rentler and Zillow and Realtor and all of the platforms that there are out there available for you to look at rents and pull comps. Like you guys pull comps for houses and, sales, and it's the same. There's no, there's nothing historically. So for us, it's a little easier to go in and say, okay, this house sold for this, it's this many square feet, blah, blah, blah. But there's nothing that tells you what something rented for. You can only look at active data. But it's still really helpful. So if you say, okay, hey, there's these 2-bed, 1-bath units in Provo, they're going for, $1,495. And there's these other 2-bed, 1-bath units and they're going for $1,100. And you can kind of decipher, well, this one looks disgusting and it's in someone's basement and there's no parking. You can kind of start to decipher the things that are going to make differences on the rents, and you can pull those rents and reasonably assess whether or not that's an appropriate rent, and then take those rents and run them into a spreadsheet. I would say that's the biggest thing that I do. I mean, I run a lot of spreadsheets. I send those spreadsheets pretty much, every day to whoever is looking for, whoever's on my list that's looking for properties. I'm just going to send them a very pretty spreadsheet. I have a few ugly ones, and then I have a pretty one that I use that's really easy for people to read. It's iOS, it's called Property Evaluator. Anyone can purchase it. It's very easy to use. I would start with that. You can add any expense categories. You can add any income categories that you want, and you're going to have to go through and adjust those. They come with very bland ones to begin with, but you could go through, add income categories, add expense categories, and then go through and just start analyzing properties. So just look at what, the market has available. Even if you just want to start with what the agent has listed. So a lot of times on multifamily, they're going to list what it's rented for currently. So even if you just went in and started with that, like, hey, I'm going to pull what this gross income is on this, and I'm going to run through a mortgage scenario. It will be helpful to just start the learning process that way. And then you can go in and kind of decide, okay, I think it could rent for more. I think it could, if you went in and did cabinets, countertops, paint, carpet, $20,000, $30,000 a unit, would I be able to increase rents? Would that amount of money be a good investment for the increase that you're going to get on rent? Or is it not worth it? You know what I mean? At this point in the market, is that margin worth what you're going to put into the property? Is it better just to run the property the way that it is right now?
Love it. That's great. And I want to highlight something because I think this is important. There's a Bruce Lee quote that says something to the extent of, I don't fear the man or the person who's practiced 10,000 kicks once. I fear the person that has practiced one kick 10,000 times. And hopefully, as you just heard Amy go through this, can you tell that she's an investment expert? And that's what a client is looking for. So what I would highly recommend, if you are going to take this approach, to just think about what is the consistent practice that I'm going to go through of analyzing deals, because I'm going to start knowing some common patterns as well. And so I can at a glance, Amy can do this now, where she can at a glance look at a few different metrics and determine it makes sense to go a little bit further and do a deep dive analysis on this property, or it doesn't, right? Which is the strategic factor here. And so just realize that she has become an expert of this process through repetition, which is awesome. For sure. So if you were to maybe just talk about how you guide new investors, there's a lot of clients where, they might be in a different position and they might not have 20, 25, 30% down, right, to get started with investing. And so how do you guide newer investors towards their rental property? Or what strategies do you typically recommend?
So with newer investors, I feel like most of the time, especially right now with interest rates and prices, I feel like most of the time when I'm working with a new investor, they're going to be owner occupying. You know what I mean? And so with that type of a person, I typically lean them towards a multi-unit because more often than not, the mindset of that investor is going to be I would like to take this property and I want to live here for a couple of years, and then I want to move out and I want to rent both sides of this, or all three sides of this, or all four sides of this, right? So they're going to buy a duplex, a triplex, or a fourplex. And one of the most common misunderstandings that I run into at the beginning, I had a conversation with someone yesterday about it that was a new investor, is that there is a difference between a single family with an ADU and an actual legal duplex. So that's probably the first place that I would start with a new investor, is to explain the difference of a basement apartment that's either a mother-in-law or a legal accessory apartment versus an actual duplex. Because if the plan is for them to move out of that property and purchase another one and rent both sides, or like I said, all three, four sides of that in the future, if you have, assisted them to purchase a property that's not a legal duplex, they can most certainly use it that way. There just is a bigger risk. So it's not legal to rent both sides of that type of property. So if you, have somebody that moves into a single family property that has a legal accessory apartment, if they move out of that property and they no longer own or occupy it, their neighbors, because it's always the neighbors, will turn them in and they will almost certainly get shut down. So I have taken on properties for management where we're fine to manage those properties. We just let the owner know, like, this is an illegal duplex. If you get in trouble with the city, we have to shut it down. Like, we have to vacate one side of it, and then you have to decide what to do. You either lease the whole thing as one unit, or you sell the thing and exchange it for something else. So that's probably, with a new investor, the biggest thing and the most common thing that I run into is people thinking, oh, hey, I'm just going to buy this ADU, because they're almost always less expensive than a duplex. And so it's more attractive. They're like, oh, hey, how come this one, wouldn't work? And that's just, it's a misunderstanding. Like, people don't understand that there's a difference there. So that's probably the biggest thing. The other thing is, you want to make sure that on the other side of that, if they don't have 20% to put down, that's totally, like, understandable, especially if they're going to be owner occupying. What I would just help them to understand is that this is going to be the liability on the other side. So I usually like to start on a low side and show them, hey, okay, so this is what it would look like if you buy it and live in one side. This is your liability. If you end up moving out of it, this is probably going to be your liability. So if you have enough saved in a year to buy another one, and say you lease this out, probably the rental rate is going to be right about here in a year. And so you would still have a liability. So right now, where we are in our market, I do not see properties that with 5% down in a year will cash flow. So I have it's pretty unrealistic at this point. See what happens with rents and interest rates this next year. But so I would just make sure that they're clear, that they understand that if they're only going to be putting 5% down, there's still going to be a liability, almost certainly, on the other side of that. And they have to be comfortable with that. They have to be able to say, yeah, I'm fine to take a $400, $500, $600 a month hit in a year because I want to buy another one and I save this much cash for another one.
Yeah.
So.
And it actually brings me back kind of full circle to one of your beginning pieces, is that a lot of what you do up front is educating the clients, really consulting them. And that's what I hear in this answer as well, is that you're being a guide and telling them also the roadblocks that they could run into, right? And making sure that you're being a fiduciary to that client. Going back to the part where you talked in the beginning about really setting the vision for a client and helping them to understand that cash flow is not, it is king in investing, but it's actually not the only metric that matters, right? And so, kind of the perspective, maybe you just share with us the vision of helping them to see, well, even if a home is, for investors who are putting 15, 20% down, very likely still that it could be break even or negative $200, right? Cash flow, right? Or more. And so maybe just some strategy into coaching a client right through that process of helping them to see, well, negative $200 a month, let's say, is negative $2,400 a year. If you do that, realizing that rents increase year over year, you're underwater maybe 2-3 years. And so can you realistically eat the negative cash flow of $6,000? Let's put that aside, right? While you're getting into this property, because you're benefiting from all of the other investment returns, right? So if you could just recap, what are the other ways that people are actually making money through owning real estate other than just cash flow?
Yeah, the biggest one for if you can get people to wrap their brain around it is certainly the gap between the loan pay down and the appreciation, right? So those two metrics combined are really what create massive wealth for people in real estate. So when you're paying down, especially when they start to think about they're not actually making that huge payment. So if you're eating $6,000 a year, you certainly have a good chunk of money that has been paid by someone else, right? Like a lot of that liability has been paid for by the renter. And so when you start to think, oh, okay, I usually start to talk about amortization schedules. So I will pull up amortization schedules for people and say, okay, this is not where your pretty spreadsheet comes in. Your pretty spreadsheet does not do these things. So like I have other spreadsheets for this specific reason so that you can say, okay, I don't know what tax bracket you're in. You're in this tax bracket, right? If you're in this tax bracket, then your depreciation is going to offset or, give you this much benefit for this tax bracket. And then if you have your interest write-off is going to make this much more of a difference on this tax bracket, right? So it gets a little bit more granular when you start getting into to the other sides of real estate investing, which I think is probably why people have a little bit more of a hard time to understand those. But knowing that your loan pay down and your appreciation over time, it just makes such a big difference for an investor. Those are the real wealth generators, in my opinion, for my own portfolio. Those are the things that just really have made huge, huge differences for us. So just holding, and that's why it does take time. So the time that you spend in real estate is, really important. They say it's, I don't know what that saying is, but it's not about the time that you buy real estate. It's not of time that you spend in real estate. Because once you have a property that you've owned for 10 years, your, amortization schedule is really starting to become a lot more favorable for you, as much as like the amount of money that you're keeping. And although I think one of the reasons that people have a hard time understanding that is because it's not a realized gain until you sell that property, right? So people they can't go, oh, cool, like my amortization schedule says I made $300 this month. So they just look at the $12 a month that they made instead of like, hey, I had this like, $300, loan pay down. On top of that, plus I had my depreciation schedule, plus I had my interest write-off. And so being able to kind of walk the investors through all of those other things is pretty helpful when you have a little bit more, even when you don't, even when you have a brand new investor, those things are pretty helpful. Helps ease the pain of someone only putting 5% down quite a bit. I feel like if you can say, hey, you're going to have all these other tax benefits and some other good things that are going to happen over time. So
cool. So, and I just want to double down on that. If I were to just do some, napkin math on this. So you're saying, some investors are looking for $200-300 in cash flow, right, per year or per month on their
year
properties.
Right now. Yeah, I'd say that's
per
right.
year.
Yeah.
Per property per month. And if you add that up, let's call it $3,600 over the course of the year on a $300 a month cash flow. So you're saying, well, if you look at home values in Utah, we're 500, median purchase price roughly. So you're saying, well, a 3% appreciation rate on that, $500,000 house is 15,000.
And that's the assumption that I use. I always use 3%. So everyone's like 6 or 7 over a 10-year span. I always use 3. I think 3 is a great place for a whole market cycle to be.
Love it. So, which Utah has been 6.1-ish since 2000. So we've been far higher than that, but being very proactive on setting the right expectations is great. I would rather, under promise and over deliver to a client. So I love that you do that. But so you're just showing a client, well, why not look at the $15,000 you're getting in it ends up being more over a 10-year period
Mhm.
in appreciation than to try to get $3,600 in cash flow. So you're just helping them to really do the math
Mhm.
and play this out long term and seeing how it impacts their wealth.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
Love it. For time's sake, I'm going to jump to the last question that I have, which is that we didn't even get into your property management business.
Oh, boy.
Obviously, that is something that you've built over time, and you manage over a little over 300 doors,
You do.
which I'm sure is a fun process. But how do you do it all? My last question is just how, because you run a big business as a solo agent, you crush it, and closing a little over 30 to 40 deals a year on top of managing 300 doors. So just how do you do that while balancing, obviously, having a husband and kids at home? You're a power mom. So how do you do it all?
Oh man, I don't do it all. That's what I have some really good people on my team. So I have, property management. I have a whole team of people. I have employees that are very awesome. I hold weekly meetings. I'm available for, emergencies if needed. But really, I guess it would go down to like systems and processes for each side of those businesses. So property management has to have things that happen in a set way when something triggers that, right? So in an emergency, like there has to be a set way that no matter who's on call, they're going to react, right? So it would be for me like setting up people who are responsible and care about doing a good job. So yeah, systems and processes is, I guess, really what it all boils down to. But realistically, it's having really good people around you that you can trust to execute, you know, all of the processes and procedures that you have put in place.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Love it. This was not actually planned, but Hunter, if you'll go to the next slide, I think this is perfect. Is what Amy's really highlighting is the power of leverage, right? Leveraging systems, tools, and then obviously having a team that also supports. Next week, we have the Leverage, the Multiply Your Business series here in this room from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. We'll have lunch included. This is going to be, we're streaming in top agents from across the country. And so you want to be here for that. It's going to be leads, listings, and leverage is the 3-part series that we're going to go through, 1 per hour. And then Hunter, if you'll hit the next slide, also doubling on what Amy was sharing is how do you effectively, when you're in scale mode, this is talking to some of you rainmakers out there or those who want to grow a team. Johnny is actually going to be doing a fundamentals to hiring course. And this is going to be later on this month. You'll want to be in that session. He's going to go through something called the KPA. It's a Keller Personality Assessment for those who are not familiar with that. We have our own personality assessment test that you can do with people that you're hiring on your team and really analyze how they might fit into what you're trying to accomplish. So that, well, again, was not planned, but I think it fits perfectly with what Amy has showcased is that having systems in place, having leverage support through a team is such a big key when you're in growth mode. So thank you, Amy. We appreciate it. Give her a hand. Thank you.